Okay, so I'm going to quickly share my screen. Show everyone here around the Discovery Center. So this is the Discovery Center homepage, and the Discovery Center is broken into two individual catalogs that you'll see here. So if you're looking for more information about a particular SAP Business Technology Platform service, you'll want to head over into the service catalog, which we can do here. And this is a list of all of the Business Technology Platform services, so you can browse what's available. And also inside of each service that you'll see once it loads here is a breakdown of the service. So I'm going to open SAP Business Application Studio because it's one of the services that we'll be covering in today's call with today's mission. So you can view an overview of the service, get some brief information. There's also an info up here about a blog that you can view for more information about the service. You can view the pricing, so what service plans are available, the regions that it's available in. You can view the roadmap, so what's coming up in the future in terms of innovations. That's also all available here. So again, just kind of a very quick introduction to what the service catalog is all about and what you can find in the individual services. There's also what's called related missions. So this is going to be in the mission catalog, which we'll show in just a second here. We'll show business technology platform use cases. So those are going to be, let's pull one up, go into the mission catalog, and I will actually pull up the mission that we're going to be showing today with our experts. Just type in part of the title of the, let's see, here it is. So this is our mission for today, or our use case. So a use case is a business challenge that a customer or a business is facing, and then we have a provided solution that could be solved with the business technology platform services. Here we list out which services will be leveraged for the solution. So like we saw, this is that same link into the service catalog. We have the project board, which you're going to see in more detail later, so I won't jump into that now. Related resources, support, so that's where you can reach out to individual support members or the SAP community. And again, related missions. So that's kind of just a quick look around the SAP Discovery Center, that there is a mission catalog, there is a service catalog. So of course, there's much more to find there. But let's get into today's topic. So we are talking about creating a custom mobile application. But specifically, if you start here in the services, we're going to be talking about using low-code technologies. So we have SAP AppGyver that's listed there. And I am going to hand over to Jim or Herut, whichever one of you wants to go first, to introduce yourself, tell us about what you do for SAP, and then we can jump right into your topic.
Sounds great, Cecily. Thanks a lot for the introduction. My name's James Rapp, but I hope you call me Jim. I've been with SAP for 18 years, started in support and moved over to the technology and innovation board area about 8 or 9 years ago. Feels like an eternity. I work for a team called Platform Adoption Advisory, and I wear a few hats. I do some of our business development, and I'm also dabbling a little bit in engineering. And I'm joined by my colleague, Herut. Herut, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Jim. So I'm in the same team like Jim in the platform adoption and advisory team, and working mainly on different reference architectures for business technology platform using different line of business solutions from SAP, and also running the adoption, helping for enablement of these reference architectures with the field. And it over back to you, Jim.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Herut. So I'm going to get things started today. I will introduce this mission and use case to you. Get my screen sharing going. And you should see the same mission that Cecily briefly introduced. But this is a use case that our team built. So Herut, myself, and a few other colleagues. And we worked quite hard to get it released in time for TechEd, which hopefully some of you attended in November. October, time flies when you're having fun. But the idea behind this use case was to provide a real life example of extending SAP SuccessFactors with AppGyver and various low code technologies. We wanted to do something that was relevant to one of our line of business solutions. And Harut and I had both been working with some of the HR HXM colleagues for a good chunk of last year. And actually prior to that, we had developed a use case in the lead up to Sapphire called Calculate Seniority with event-driven extensions, all right? And the reason I mention this is that we've used the same architecture pattern and enriched it to work with AppGyver as well, right? So here you see this create a custom mobile HR app. It has some dependencies on this other mission, right? I just want to connect these dots a little bit as I kind of explain the bigger picture here. But this is actually a business use case that was brought to us from a customer. A major airline has been running this seniority calculator in their business for quite some time. And actually the HR colleagues brought this to us as something to develop further, right? So Harut and I looked at this in like the April-May timeframe, and we really updated what was a Neo-based Java as a service architecture from the original customer scenario. And we updated this to utilize components that are part of the BTP North Star architecture. So things like the event mesh and SAP Cloud Application Programming. And Harut will get into those details here in just a couple of minutes. But the goal for us was to use this resultant architecture pattern and then enhance it with more functionality, right? So in this case, specifically with AppGyver, and some of the low code, no code capabilities that that brings. Right, so just kind of as I start to get past the rest of this preamble and background, you know, this concept of seniority is a real use case that we got, as I mentioned, from a customer, but it's fairly specific to industries where unions are critical, for example. So think, you know, the aforementioned air travel, public sector, things like this. So we would love in 2022 to take this architecture, this pattern, and apply it to what I would call a more broadly applicable business process somewhere else in the, you know, recruit to retire process. So think benefits enrollment, timesheets and management. And near the end of our presentation, I'll just give a little call to action, right? To ask you, maybe if you have any background in HR, to also be thinking about this, right? I hope you'll find the pattern and the mission interesting. Maybe we can have some dialogue and Q&A at the end. So the last I'll mention about this Calculate Employee Seniority is that there are some prerequisites for our mission. Things like running a BTP booster for extension development, provisioning a HANA Cloud instance, and ultimately configuring a SuccessFactors tenant. So these are things like the Intelligent Service Center and some custom fields for seniority. But we've worked really hard to decouple this mission from the SuccessFactors backend as much as possible to allow folks that, let's say, don't have access to a SuccessFactors tenant to still take the mission to launch, shall we say, right? So, you know, we've provided some content like sample data and mock service APIs that we can also tell you more about. Great. So in terms of this mission, Cecily alluded to the project board. We try to introduce you to some of the technologies that are used in the mission. So there is a discover phase where you'll access the AppGyver community, learn some of the essentials and basics of building an app. And I also mentioned that we use CAP, the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model, to be the intermediate layer between SuccessFactors and all of its OData APIs and security, and AppGyver on the other side. Some of these prerequisites I already alluded to, but we do in one of these cards utilize what's called a booster. And if you're not familiar with a booster, it actually allows you to connect to one of your BTP global accounts and configure the entitlements, the service quotas, etc., kind of automatically. So think of this as a way to bootstrap your BTP sub account and take away some of the, let's say, manually allocating a service instance, assigning role collections and authorizations. So hopefully a way to accelerate your ability to really get into the core content of the mission. Similarly, little bit of detail on what the use case is about and a demo video that we released last year that I definitely encourage you to check out. It's only about 4 minutes, give or take. But I think with that, it's a good opportunity, Harut, for me to stop sharing and hand over to you to take us through some of, let's say, the pro code requirements for the mission.
Sure, thanks a lot for the introduction. Let me quickly share my screen. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yep, I can see it. Looks good.
All right, perfect. All right, guys, then let's have a look, as Jim mentioned, on a couple of pro code activities or prerequisites which we include in this mission. So if you can see in the screen, and Jim already mentioned the reference architecture here for this particular use case, before we starting with the low code approach using the AppGyver, to build the scenario, we need some prerequisites. So, and Jim already mentioned, so we relied here as intermediate layer on the cloud application programming model to establish a connection to our SuccessFactors system and take care all about the security and on eventing and to prepare also the APIs, because the rich APIs is really very important for the AppGyver, so that we have a fully usable APIs and our data service is very enriched for AppGyver with navigation, with all the necessary parameters coming from different systems. So, here we use the CAP Pro Code approach to achieve this, right? So for that, you can also see we are relying on a couple of other BTP services like Event Mesh. In this example, we are listening on the events coming from SuccessFactors system. And here, whenever a new hiring or rehiring process is triggered in a SuccessFactors system, so it will notify, it will write in a messaging queue of Event Mesh about these changes. And then from our application middleware in the CAP, we can pull this information which is listening to the Event Mesh. So we'll get the event notification, and then we will process it accordingly. Additionally to that, we are using HANA Cloud as a persistence layer. So for our seniority calculator to keep some of the historical data and to calculate also the seniority, we have several calculation views and historical tables where we keep this information is necessary. So very minimum information required from the SuccessFactors. So basically we receive everything what we need with Event Mesh. It's a very small payload, and then we use for persistency and for the APIs. And then finally, the CAP will provide this enriched Odata services, which we'll later use from AppGyver for building our final mobile applications. So now let's have a briefly look here to our CAP project, what we exactly did. I hope most of you are familiar with cloud application programming model, and we have here just the normal structure of a CAP application, having the persistency layer, the DB folder here you can see, and the service layer here. So before I start with those, to give a short overview to you, maybe we can also have a look to our project. So what it consists from. In the package JSON, you can see that of course we are having some dependencies for CAP CDS model. But I want to highlight two important things here. So one thing is the V2 version proxy for Odata. So by default, the cloud application programming model is providing the Odata service in a V4 format. And the APIs we are going to consume from SuccessFactors are having the V2 version. So we need a small proxy here. And another thing which is required for the moment for the AppGyver is the course support. So we need to enable the course as well, that the AppGyver can use our API from CAP side. And finally, having these couple of more dependencies. So another important point I want to highlight. So since we are going to use a couple of remote services as well in this scenario, so we defined in our package JSON the service we are using. In this case, from the SuccessFactors, we are directly going to use some entities or data which are on a version 2. And here we are providing the destination for that which we are using. So you can see this is the destination defined on a BTP site. And using this destination, we can actually access to the SuccessFactors system entity. So here you can go more advanced, so you can divide it to the development part, to production. So let's say for the development, you can even use the API Business Hub guys and the secrets for your testing purposes, and for the production, so you can the deployment part, so you can use the destination look like here. So having that, let me quickly jump to show us that we have a very little schema definition in our database layer on HANA. So we define the employee as an entity with very minimum information here required, which we are getting actually from the SuccessFactors by triggering the event. And here, after running some logic, we will calculate the seniority and persist it in a HANA site. And finally, after that, we have our actual service definition. So here you can find the Cbs file where we defined all the services which are exposed as an Odata service and their handler implementations in a JS file. To give you just a brief overview what we have here. So you can see we have 4 or 5 entities defined here. The first one, the employee entity, this is actually the entity which is locally managed in a BTP site, and which I showed from the persistency, so and which then will be used and updated by the AppGyver. Then we have 3 other services exposed, which are directly coming from our remote service. So you can see here that we defined the photo user, which is coming from the external. Here, so the CDS and CAP model, CAP CDS is providing command line tools to actually import the schema of the EDMX format of these remote services with CDS import and having the EDMX file from business from the API Business Hub, so you can actually create the CSN file, which is required then to do the access to remote service. And having that, so you can see, so for those entities, we don't even have a persistency, so we are directly accessing from the SuccessFactors system by selecting only the fields we need for the use case. And last but not least, we have so-called mix-in employee profile, which is basically combining our local persistence entity with the remote one. We are creating a little association here. So this is going to be our final entity, which is actually used by AppGyver, so enriched with all the information we need, combining the photo information, the user information, seniority, and so on. Yeah. So if we look here for the implementation part here, so you can see we have quite a lot of code here written to just to first of all build the seniority logic. What we have the listeners here, for example, on our messaging for the event mesh. So maybe Jim, in parallel, if you can run one new rehive process, maybe we can see that the event will be catched here. So I think it will take a while. Meanwhile, I'm showing this part, so you can trigger the change. And so basically what you can see here, so we have the handler here for our messaging. Basically, we subscribe to a particular topic coming from the SuccessFactors system, which is subscribed in the event mesh. So you can see that the contract change whenever that event is triggered on the SuccessFactors system. So this we'll try right now to trigger, so we can see if it catches here our application. And basically once it's catched, so we are running our calculating the seniority total days. So the logic here, and basically here the implementation of it. So we are running a couple of lines of code here to find out based on different status information what is basically the seniority. And after having all this, so we also write it back into the SuccessFactors system, this seniority changes. All right, so I think that right away, thanks for that, Jim. So you can see we have here also written a small log. So you can see that event was catched here by our CAP application. And so basically can see this was the topic. Again, we were subscribed, and this is all the information was passed by to event mesh, and then we got it in our application. The termination date, originated date, what status was changed. So the Jim changed the status to rehire process, and we have the user ID. Then we can later write it back to SuccessFactors system. I think that I would say that's for now enough details from the CAP side, and I would like to hand it over back to the Jim, who will show you the low-code approach will be built relying on these data provided here from the CAP.
Very good. Thanks, Harut. So just to kind of close that section, if you, let's see, actually, I should probably get my screen sharing again. Almost got ahead of myself. Okay. So effectively, Harut took you through the details of these two cards. We tried to make this as accessible as possible so that you can benefit from most of our boilerplate code. And you know, in this first card, effectively what you'll be doing is logging in, accessing Business Application Studio, and forking our repository, which, as I put in the chat, is on github.com SAP samples. And once you've done that, you can update it with some references to your environment, right? So for the ID of your event mesh instance, I think I saw a message in the chat about binding it to a queue. So there's a em.json file that's part of the project that defines some of those properties. But ideally, you know, rather than trying to write these, 100 lines of code, you can clone ours as a starting point, make these small adjustments, and be off and running. That's the idea. Okay, so what Harut has showed us so far are the pro code elements that are really vital to help AppGyver deliver on its value proposition, let's say. What I found from working with AppGyver is that it's really dependent on how good your data is, how mature the data is, how it can handle parameters for aggregation and navigation. Otherwise, you find yourself writing a lot of pseudocode, right? Think like Excel functions and things in AppGyver. So what we found was it's really important to simplify some of the complexity that exists in the SuccessFactors APIs. Those are the semantics that Harut showed briefly in the mix-in, right, for our service definition. And then in the end, the developer can simply consume these APIs, all right? So what I'm gonna try to take you through over the next 10, 12 minutes are just some of the core ideas and concepts that we put together in AppGyver. And I'm not trying to like replace any of the great like Academy tutorials that are available on the AppGyver site, but I hope this will give you maybe a roadmap on how some of these concepts can all work together to really deliver, let's say, a high quality mobile application. So I'm going to start here in the low code, no code development lobby. I accessed this through my BTP sub account. You can kind of see the information here. So once I have run this BTP booster, I'm able to subscribe to SAP AppGyver. Effectively, this gives me the same capabilities as you'll have on the free community edition, but it's added security and roles, the ability to also develop some low-code applications in Business Application Studio or utilizing mobile services. But the long story short is, now that I've enabled this, I can log in here and I can create a new AppGyver project or one of the other types that I mentioned. So I already have this exception handling app open. And I'll give you just a little preamble that, you know, the idea here in the productive case for employee seniority was, you know, the airline had to bring together after a big acquisition, something like 100,000 new employees. And in travel, seniority is incredibly important. And, you know, if I'm a pilot with like 1 minute more seniority than Harut, and I want to fly to Hawaii, right? And we both put our, let's say, requests in for that flight leg, I'm going to get it. And Harut's going to get stuck flying to like Kansas or something. No offense to Kansas. So when you have these hundreds of thousands of employees, you have these really nuanced business rules, there are always going to be cases where the business rule can't automatically handle things and it needs a human, right? An HR business partner to really take a look and make a decision, right? So the persona for our mobile app is an HR business partner who's incredibly busy, has very little time to learn new tools, and needs everything in one place, right? So we built this exception handling app. And I'm going to start by just showing you this kind of first page and some of the highlights. So here we are inside of AppGyver. Looks like it still saved some of my previous view. So I'll get back to the default canvas. And the look and feel is very much that you can select the form factor for the app you want to build. And then you have this component market where there are things like images and texts that you can really just drag and drop onto the canvas. You know, my background, I came over to SAP as part of the Business Objects acquisition. So this kind of look and feel reminded me a lot of Beck's Web Application Designer, which then became Design Studio and Lumira, and now exists as Analytic Designer in SAP Analytics Cloud, right? So for any of you that have some of that other SAP Analytics experience, this might also be familiar to you. But we'll do things here like add an image list. And I want to take a minute to talk about this type of component. So what AppGyver also allows you to do is take things like an image and a repeating row field and bind them together in what they call a composite component, right? So if I double click on this component, you see it kind of blows it up and focuses on this one thing. And then I can see that this image list is actually comprised of 4 cells, right? One of which contains an image, one of which contains a primary label, a secondary label, and an icon, all right? And by doing this, by grouping these things together, I can then create my own component without writing any code, right? And this really is a big part of that value prop of low code, no code, the ability to take pieces, assemble them. Think of it kind of how you would in like a PowerPoint, right? Where you group a bunch of objects together and then you can resize them or duplicate them independently. Okay, so in the mission, you'll do some things like add the headline, as I mentioned, add this list, and then do a couple of specific things like create a full screen background. Right, so it seems quite trivial. You can see this toolbar that we've kind of pinned to the bottom of the page, and where some of the low code capabilities still require or you'll benefit from a little knowledge about like the document object model, right, the DOM, is that they try to abstract some of these concepts like absolute and relative positioning. In a way, right, that makes sense for, let's say, a citizen developer. So what we found really quickly, and in the mission, you'll see some really helpful video walkthroughs that we found on the AppGyver community. But I want to just show you for a moment, if I can get to the page layout, that we have certain settings here, like this advanced stretch to the viewport height, right? If you've never done any web development, you might not even know what the viewport is, right? But what this allows us to do is say, instead of stacking all these components on top of each other, right, where the last one is, let's actually make the view of this page the same as the height of my canvas, right? And then let's take this container that controls our toolbar, and if I can find it somewhere, we will change the, I should just reference it in the mission rather than grope blindly. But the ability to say, don't make the position of this element relative to all the other components on the page, instead make it absolute. And let's float it just a few pixels from the bottom. So let's see, I have the mission open here on my other window. So after the header row, fantastic. Then we should be able to say layout. And we can set some things. Let me see if I can resize this at all. Oops, a little ahead of myself. Great. So you can see here that we have this position section. By default, it'll be set to relative. If I set it to relative, you'll see just a little bit of a change here for the time being, but I've also set some of the margins, right? So I've also said I want to, instead of orient this from the top of the canvas, let's orient it from the bottom of the canvas, right? So there are some, let's say, hacks like this that you'll see throughout the mission, right? Okay, so now we've designed the first page. This is going to hold a summary of all the exceptions, right? Cases where we've triggered a rehire event, but our persistence layer doesn't have the original termination date needed for this seniority calculation. Once we've got these individual items, the HR business partner needs to get some more details about this employee. Some information that will be sourced from our HANA Cloud persistence layer, and some other values. These are just samples. I'll show you the real app in a moment, that the user will fetch from SuccessFactors on the fly. Once they've got all of these dates, they'll be able to confirm that everything looks good. They'll hit submit, and this record will then get passed back through the CAP layer and ultimately updated in SuccessFactors. Now, in the interest of time, I tend to talk too much, I think. Let me show you a couple of other things here. So the next step in this process, once I've designed these screens, is not only to handle like UI navigation, but ultimately to hook it up to data as well, right? So this is where the CAP services that Harut took us through come into play, right? So you'll see this local entity, right, that we looked at a little bit earlier. Harut showed us this. I can't see the URL, but this is that employee local entity, right? And what we can do are things like run a test, right, to see that the backend is actually returning some data. Indeed, it is. And AppGyver also lets us utilize terms like list and retrieve and create for basically all of the CRUD operations that are enabled on the underlying service endpoint. Quick shout out to the AppGyver team. When we started working on this, Odata was not even an option. And before I could even get nervous about our timeline, the development team had added that to the product. So really agile product development team, and we've seen a lot of progress just in the last few months. The only other thing that I'll show you here is that we've also done the employee profile, which is the mix-in. This is a read-only entity, and it's going to provide us not only with the local details, but also the photograph and a few other components. All right. And so once we have these data resources available to us, each page also gives us the ability to create some variables. And although the scope of these are a little bit different, if you go into data variables, we can add one of those resources that I showed you on the previous screen. So why don't I just show you real quick what the employee profile looks like. And this little menu at the bottom allows us to see the logic that's associated with a given component. So here, what this is telling us is that for the employee profile data source that we connected, when this page loads, get a record collection, all right? So AppGyver uses terms like list and collection. Generally, they mean an array or a column. And then we'll also use terms like object, which I guess you could think more of like a row if we're thinking in the no code terminology. But basically what this is saying is get the record collection from this backend service, stash it into a data variable that I've called employee profile 1, and every 10 seconds, refresh in the background. Now in the mission, I removed this because by default, it's running like every 500 milliseconds, but I added it back in here so that you could see the demo in kind of a live state. So last thing I'll show you in the designer, and then we'll do the demo so that we still have some time at the end for Q&A, is navigation as well, right? So what I ultimately want to enable the user to do is select one of the exception rows and have that employee ID passed into that detail page that I showed you. Okay, so we do a couple of things here. One, we set an event on the component tap for this particular object. And there is a navigation component here for logic that allows us then to say when this component is tapped, open this page, the second page, exception details, and populate this page parameter with the current ID. So the current ID will be whichever one of these rows are clicked, right? And this is how we pass the context from this summary page into the detail page. Okay. So now I've built the app, I have connected it to data, I have modeled some low code, no code capabilities, and I want to take this app for a test drive. How do I do it? Well, I have this local launch capability, and AppGyver provides a preview portal. So I've already loaded this, and what I'll show you is that I am emulating an iPad. here, right? So this is a responsive application. If I'm in full screen, it's going to show up more or less in full screen. But if I emulate, for example, an iPad, we kind of see how the application resizes, right? So just for your benefit, I'll issue a quick reset. And we'll see this exception page populate with all of this information, right? So each of these rows is an employee that we rehired in our SuccessFactors system, and it comes along with their full name and their profile picture. And you can see somewhere here in the developer console, let's see if I can actually find it, that it is making a call to this employee profile that sits on our BTP account and accesses the CAP service that Harut showed you a little while ago. So the employee that I hired while Harut was talking was this Emily Neal, right? So if I click on her information, I'll get this drill down, again, fetching the information from SuccessFactors dynamically. And this is also relevant from like a GDPR, PII point of view, because really we don't want to be duplicating full names and other, let's say, sensitive HR information in the BTP if we can avoid it. It's already in SuccessFactors. There are stringent access controls there. Let's just pull it dynamically as needed, right? So in this case, user then fetches the dates from the SuccessFactors system, visually confirm that everything looks correct. Maybe they've got SuccessFactors open in another window to double check. But in the end, once this is submitted and we return to the home page, we'll see that this user is, well, easier said than done. So this user should disappear. We'll give that a second. And in the meantime, I'll go back over to SuccessFactors and show you how this thing ends, right? Which is with a write back to the user's profile in SuccessFactors. So this is my SuccessFactors demo tenant. This is the employee who we just rehired. And see, I was just a little too fast. She is gone from the AppGyver screen. So what we'll see here under the employment details are the results of our calculation, right? So Emily was rehired today. Her previous end date was like 9 years ago. So none of that legacy seniority carries over. And now it's been appropriately set to zeros across the board. The business rule that we implemented is something like if you're rehired within 180 days of your previous termination date, then your seniority is preserved. If that lapse in service time is greater than 6 months, reset it to 0, right? Okay, I feel like I went pretty quickly, but we're getting to that point where we had allocated for some Q&A before next steps. So maybe it's a good time to open it up. I see there's some stuff in the chat. We can maybe use some time to dive deeper into any areas of interest.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Jim, for going through that. You did go quick, but was very well understood, so good job. It looks like most of the questions are surrounding kind of security aspects. So maybe I will take the first one from the chat, which is, where is the employee search by name? I name, address, etc. How do you secure personal identification data from the man in the middle attack, and any encryption of the data, tokenization?
It's pretty heavy. I can take a stab on a little bit of that, and Harut, maybe you can back me up. So I'm not entirely sure by the employee search part, but what I'll say is that, you know, securing personal identification is about making sure that there is a destination configured to the back end, that it's ideally, you know, not using service accounts that have unlimited access to the back end, so that we leverage the security model, right, that you've invested in on the HR system or the ERP system or any other back end. Similarly, I kind of alluded to this, that, you know, all of this information here, so Brogan Sadler and the profile picture, they're not persisted either in the BTP, so we don't store that information in our HANA database, nor does this get persisted in the AppGyver application. So if this app is not in the preview portal, but it's deployed into a BTP runtime that is appropriately access controlled to the end user, then we make sure that they're not seeing anything incorrect and we're not duplicating any of that personally identifiable information. Harut, do you have any point of view on man in the middle or any of the other components?
Yeah, not much to add. I mean, for this particular case, to keep it simple, our services are just exposed without any additional OAuth-based authentication. But for more real-life scenarios, of course, there is a need which you can secure on the cloud application programming model, pretty straightforward, by using some annotations, so you can secure your service, and then by OAuth, and then from AppGyver side also connect to the secured service. And then once you have done that, there should be no any further security issues there. And from the second part, Jim already mentioned, so from the BTP to the success factors from the CAP. So this is everything also secured connection using the destination again and the OAuth mechanism to reach the success factor system.
It's a good point, Harut. So we do rely quite a bit on the CAP, right? And the enterprise grade services in the BTP to complement what's available in AppGyver. Yeah, great point. And I was just here for propriety, pulling up one of the records from our HANA persistence to see that, you know, we get a user ID, we get some date timestamps, but we don't get any of that personally identifiable information.
Excellent, thank you both. One other question is, how do you distinguish two or more people with the same first and last name?
Fair enough. So each of the users in SuccessFactors does have a unique user ID. And we honestly semi-arbitrarily decided on first name, last name, just to kind of demonstrate the difference between this technical information and this more, let's say, user-friendly business application. But you know, if you wanted to, you could very easily add a set of parentheses and add, let's say, the numeric user ID or the email address or any of the other, let's say, rich people information available in the HR system.
All right, and how do you handle security aspects? So calling OData service calls from AppGyver single sign-on.
Yep. So as Harut mentioned, in this, we're pretty much leaving things wide open to demonstrate the capability. CAP has the ability to fully secure those OData services, right? We use XSUAA to do so, IAS, et cetera. As far as SSO is concerned, right now you would achieve that by taking this resultant React.js application and deploying it, let's say in the Launchpad service, in one of the BTP runtimes, perhaps into SAP mobile services. But I will admit that in the short term, this requires some manual efforts by a developer. And what we understand from the product team is in their roadmap, they fully intend to integrate AppGyver more tightly with things like mobile services and some of our other components to handle the, let's say, security, authentication, and authorization concepts.
Yeah, and I think that is actually a good point because, like you said, a lot of this was talked about at TechEd as well, that you know, there's this concern about professional development going away, for example, with low code. And I think you've shown here that it isn't, you know what I mean? It's to support both types of development areas and to work together to make things quicker. So
yeah, indeed.
All right. The next one is, can LDAP be used as a data source for such use cases?
LDAP. Well,
yeah.
What I will tell you is that today, AppGyver can connect, excuse me, to either local storage, right? So think like an Excel spreadsheet, or a REST API or an Odata API. So without getting into like the nitty gritty about what particular LDAP, the short answer is if you can provide access via a REST or Odata API, then absolutely. If not, you might be in a situation where you're like replicating some information out of LDAP into another data source where it becomes more accessible. But that would be the short answer.
Thank you. So that was everything that's in the chat. So feel free to add anything here the last minute, or we're kind of a smaller round. So even if you want to unmute, feel free. It does look like there's one here. Does this booster available, quote, prepare an account for developing extension applications on BTP trial account? So I think they're asking, is there a booster available to prepare the account?
Yeah, I don't honestly know if the boosters are limited to only the global account or the trial account. I'm not sure, Cecily, maybe we could like just try to get an answer to this one a little bit later.
Yep, for sure, we can circle it.
I know there are some limitations for the trial account, so not everything was covered. It might even be that that's not available in a trial environment, but on the free tier account, so you will definitely find the booster.
Nice one. Okay, well, Cecily, I'd love to just end up with like a call to action, if that's all right, and then maybe I can hand back to you for any closing. But you know, I hope you got some benefit out of this. I'd love it if you wanted to try out the mission and give us some feedback. But my call to action is, you know, to think about HR in the context of low code, no code. If you've used SuccessFactors in the past, you probably have seen that there are a lot of text-heavy screens with a lot of complexity. So we believe that it's a powerful opportunity for business users or citizen developers to create low code solutions to like streamline and simplify some of these topics. So my offer to you is that if you have some other use cases that you think this could apply to, I'd love to hear from you, either in the mission or directly via email, right? So thanks very much for the opportunity and for the engagement.
Yes, thank you very much. And just like Jim said, reach out to us. You can contact us via email. If you reach out to me, I can also connect you with Jim and Harut if you're not able to find their email. We will have another garage call the first Wednesday of February 2nd. We're going to be heading back into the integration area. So make sure you check that out. I will for sure publish a blog post on what the mission is we'll be covering and who the speakers are. Thank you everyone for joining. There is a couple more questions in the chat, Jim, since we have a couple of minutes, maybe we can try and touch on those. It looks like maybe you answered one, River.
I'm going to give it a shot.
Okay, cool.
So regarding AppGyver in the free tier, I admit I don't know anything about this. What I will say is AppGyver, they released a blog not long ago confirming that the free edition, the community edition, is free forever. And we actually built this originally in the community edition, and then I rebuilt it in the BTP version, and functionally they're the same. So what I would tell you is you should feel free to utilize that community edition, connect it to OData or REST APIs that you have in your BTP account, and rest assured that at the end you can export that entire React.js archive and save that. Right. So hopefully that will give you, if not the convenience of having the free tier service in the short term, at least the same end capability where you're free to develop and then consider moving forward once you've proven, let's say, the value prop. And let's see, I think the last question. So Phil's asking about limitations with AppGyver. So Phil, let me see if I can dig up, just as we're wrapping up here, link on the community edition. So most of our documents do point to this like version on appgyver.com. And I know they have a really great change log and some, at least summary of limitations. So let me see if I can paste that into the chat while we're wrapping up.
Awesome. So yeah, like I said, the call will be recorded as well. So if you joined us a little bit late or if you had to duck out before, the recording will be available on the SAP Garage website. We'll also post it on YouTube, on the SAP Technology YouTube channel under the SAP Garage playlist. So check that out. We'll also, of course, link it inside of the mission under related resources. So that will all be available after the call. And as always, let us know how you enjoyed the call today. We're always open for feedback on how we can improve. And we will give Jim some time here to find the link for us. Don't want to cut you off. Ooh, you got it.
It's all good.
Good
So
job.
there's a change log here, a troubleshooting, an FAQ, the bugs and feature requests. I think most of what you're looking for should be here. Anything else? You're more than welcome to reach out.
Thank you. So
All
thank
right.
you, everyone. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Harut. Great session. Looks like lots of people had really appreciated what you covered today. I've seen that feedback in the chat. So thank you very much. And of course, the call will be available again for the global call later in a few hours. So looking forward to that as well. And thanks, everyone. And see you hopefully on February 2nd.
Very good. Thanks again. Take care,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.